what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the biodiversity crisis. Biodiversity collapse. Could this be a problem for you? Could mass extinctions affect you personally? Is this a problem? Yes, actually, it is a problem. I don't think that it's going to really I don't think it's going to come down to human extinction, but I think the possibility is there, and I think that we need to pay attention to it. But in the meantime, there's a lot of other things that are going extinct, including many species. We face a major environmental crisis. And the extinction crisis, the problem of mass extinctions, is actually part of a bigger problem, which is the general problem of limits to economic growth. There's only so much soil on the planet. There's only so much clean water that's drinkable that we can get to on the planet. There's only so much fossil fuel. There's only so many mineral resources, and these resources are finite. Our economy is based on these resources. Therefore, our economy must also be finite. And I believe that we have actually seriously overshot the limits to growth on numerous counts already. In fact, I would say the last time we could claim to be in some kind of superficial environmental balance was probably about the first Earth Day over 50 years ago. Since then, we've been in overshoot. Now, to return specifically to biodiversity, it's clear that we have a major extinction crisis. Species are going extinct at a rate 1,000 times faster than the normal rate of extinction. Now, is this sustainable? Anybody think that this is sustainable? I don't think so. And what have we done about the extinction crisis? Not very much. Not very much. We did have the Endangered Species Act back in shortly after the first Earth Day, and that was a big success and a great contribution to the problem, except for the fact that then in a subsequent presidential administration, the president that was in charge at that point essentially revoked all of the many of the provisions of the act, and so we've essentially gutted the Endangered Species Act. So now we're basically back to square one. Now, let's go to humans. Humans came, and we can define humans in a different way, but I like to look at it in terms of of human evolution. It started about 200,000 years ago. That's when most scientists say, well, Homo sapiens as we know him today started about 200,000 years ago. And about 100,000 years ago, things started to heat up, so to speak, for human beings. There were actually several hominid species other than humans at that point. But humans started to get the upper hand because they devised hunting. You've heard of hunter-gatherers? Well, the hunting was what was started to happen at this time. And this actually, I hate to say it, it's not the future that I would have preferred for humans exactly, but humans became a hunter species. And they started in Africa, and over thousands of years, they learned how to throw spears and kill things. This probably started out originally as a defensive strategy, a protection against predators, because predators were a key cause of human mortality, that the big animals could eat you, so you sort of stayed out of the way. But eventually, humans devised ways of protecting themselves against these animals, and then they switched from defense to offense. They learned that they could kill animals and they could eat them. And of course, other things had to happen too. They had to discover fire and things like that. But and tool making and whatever. But eventually we got to the point where about 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, humans started to leave Africa. And when they migrated from Africa, they went first to Europe and Asia and Europe. Then they went to Australia. And then about 10,000, 15,000 years ago, we're not sure when, they went to North America and South America. And what happened in these continents as humans went outward? Well, extinctions happened. There's a lot of species that we think of, like mammoths and mastodons and so forth, that had evolved and had been around for millions of years, that started going extinct. In Africa, about 20% of all species went extinct at that time. In Europe and Asia, Eurasia, it was more like maybe 30 or 40%. And then when it went into Australia, about 80% of all the large animals started going extinct. This is megafauna. I'm talking about megafauna. Megafauna are big animals. Big, basically is big, maybe a little big or a little bigger than I am. As adults, if you weigh about 100 pounds, you've made it into the megafauna. Congratulations. And so that's how we count. And actually, humans are sort of at the low end of the megafauna. Most of the megafauna, like obviously elephants, obviously giraffes, bison, deer, antelope, all these animals are bigger than 100 pounds. That's the megafauna. About 20% of all the megafauna in Africa were wiped out. 30%, 40% in Eurasia, about 80% in Australia, and about 70%, over 70% in North and South America. There were a lot of species that were roaming around in North America at that time, such as obviously mammoths and mastodons you've probably heard of. There's also giant sloths, dire wolf, all kinds of species that are not known to us today that went extinct whenever humans went there. Whenever humans go somewhere, then suddenly extinction follows. And you can even see that in areas that did not follow this precise timeline. For example, Madagascar only was relatively recently, invaded by humans. Humans went into Madagascar about 2,000 years ago, which is substantially after the 10,000, after the development of agriculture and so forth. About 2,000 years ago, and all the species went extinct there also. So all these extinction episodes continued until eventually we started to run out of things to kill. And so at that point, we developed agriculture, which is sort of a good thing and a bad thing. It's mostly a good thing, I think, but because you don't have to kill anything. And also, I think you can support a larger population. And so the human population then started to increase. So that's the basic problem that we have, is that wherever we're going, we're altering the ecology, the whole ecology of the situation. And of course, we can still exist in this situation, but obviously we're just continuing to make it worse and worse. So we covered what people call prehistoric overkill. The name for this is prehistoric overkill, that humans started killing everything. Eventually they ran out of things to kill, and so, well, okay, I guess we have to grow something now. So that's what happened. Now in modern times, actually at that time, extinctions sort of leveled, stopped, and actually the megafauna biomass of the planet actually probably declined approaching about 10,000 years ago. What happens is that megafauna, as the species megafauna are now going extinct. But there's something else that's going on, is that the human sphere is also increasing. So about 100,000 years ago, there were about 200 billion kilograms of megafauna biomass on the planet. And this continued until about 10,000 years ago, when actually megafauna biomass started to decline. And the reason it started to decline was because of prehistoric overkill, because we started running out of things to kill. And this actually may have precipitated a global cooling event at that time called the Younger Dryas. And it was because this one particular flower started to predominate in Europe at that time. And so it was because we were actually experiencing some global warming, and then suddenly it got interrupted. And that's probably because we had killed all the megafauna that were breathing out methane, that were emitting methane. All the ruminant animals that were emitting methane. In this case, there were so few humans and so few megafauna on the planet that actually methane was sort of a good thing. It was helping to keep the planet warmer after humans and livestock started repopulating the planet. And so then we have a gradual increase until the megafauna biomass recovers, and it goes up to about 200. Then we're back up to about 200 billion kilograms at about 1500. And then what happens in the next 500 years is something fairly dramatic, is that we see an explosion of megafauna biomass. So that goes up in a fairly short period of time. Geologically, this is 500 years is like nothing. You blink your eye and you miss it. But it goes from 200 billion to over 1,400 billion, over 7 times as much in just 500 years. And this also coincides with, perhaps not coincidentally, the Industrial Revolution. So we've got lots of megafauna, right? That's good, right? Well, the problem is that almost all of that increase, in fact, all of that increase is the result of that increase is that, first of all, we've got 1/3 of that total megafauna biomass is us. It's humans. And 2/3, approximately 2/3, is livestock. You've got it. So it's basically humans and their livestock have tremendously increased. In the meantime, all the wild animals are dying off. And why is that? Well, it's obvious why it is, because we've overrun the planet. It seems like the economy is determined to use every last possible square inch of the planet for human purposes. I want to make a few final points before I turn it over to you. What can we do, and what are some more of the applications for? One of the major applications is towards global warming. What are all these megafauna that are increasing out? What do they breathe out when they breathe? We've got a tremendous increase in megafauna. What are they breathing out? Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. This has a direct impact on global warming. So when we talk about the global warming problem, we should be talking about biodiversity collapse as well. This is probably about half of the problem. Now, the other thing is you could say, well, that's part of the carbon cycle, the natural carbon cycle, whereas animals and microorganisms, whatnot, put out carbon dioxide, but then we've got all these plants which take up the carbon dioxide through the process of photosynthesis. Now, I might put some reliance on this, except for one problem, is that we're also wiping out all the plants. The total phytomass, the phytomass of all plants on the planet is actually also decreasing just in the last 10,000 years or so. Is that they're also decreasing. It's been cut about in half. Václav Smil, who's a noted scientist who studied this, who also came up with some of the megafauna biomass data, he says that we've lost about half of all the phytomass on the planet. So all this plant matter that we're depending on in order to take up all this carbon dioxide, that's disappearing too. Could this possibly have something to do with climate change? I think so. And other scientists, by the way, Václav Smil is not the only one. There are other people that are studying this, and it's a serious problem. So what can we do about it? And there are several things. First of all, we have to realize that this is a problem of limits to growth. What we need is a smaller economy. What we need is a smaller economy. We don't need the economic growth. We need economic degrowth. And I think that essentially economic degrowth is going to happen. We can stop worrying about whether the economy will expand infinitely, perhaps out into space. This isn't going to happen. the economy will at some point shrink. In fact, it's already starting to shrink because natural resources are disappearing. The one that's actually disappearing the most immediately, oddly, and this is sort of a good news, bad news story, is that it's oil. That the oil that powers the whole economy it's not exactly scarce, because if we drill down further, if we go out in the middle of the ocean, we do fracking, if we go to the Alberta tar sands, we can get more oil. The problem is it's harder to get it. It's not just harder in abstract ecological terms, but it's also harder in terms of the total energy that it takes to get it out of the ground. So just in practical terms, it's becoming a problem. And so what do you have? And oil, the current peak of oil is about 2018, sometime about five years ago. And since then, we've had a period of inflation. That is, money is chasing stuff that isn't quite there or is more expensive. Oil has become almost permanently more expensive than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's much more expensive in real dollars. So the first thing we can do is we can degrow the economy. And that's probably going to pretty much happen naturally, but we can ensure that it happens as compassionately as possible. The next idea is half Earth. E.O. Wilson wrote a book called Half Earth, in which he suggested turning over half of the planet to wilderness. And as you do the math, what's the maximum sustainable, we could just use megafauna, for example, that if we had, if we said, okay, fine, we're going to have an equal amount of megafauna for humans, and then we can have another segment of the megafauna. We'll dedicate the other half to the wild animals. And if we did that, we'd have to go down. It wouldn't just be megafauna. You'd have to go down to the smaller animals and the insects and the plant matter and so forth and so on. But if you did that, that would leave a population of about, assuming that we're all vegans, then that would leave us with a total population of about maybe 1.5 billion or so. So we'd have to, I think that will actually probably come down naturally. I think you already see birth rates falling. So I'm actually not afraid that we're going to need to use violence to achieve this. I think people are going to figure it out. You look at China today, they had a one-child policy for many years, but in 2016, they stopped it. But then now the Chinese the young people aren't buying it. So I think that there is some hope. We can have half Earth, we can start reforesting the planet, and that will actually bring the CO2 levels back. So that's why, to address this is why I wrote my book, Embracing Limits, a Radical and Necessary Approach to the Environmental Crisis. I think this is what essentially we have to do, is we have to degrow the economy and do it as compassionately as possible. So 3 points in my book are: we need to reduce consumption, we need to reduce population, I think that will happen naturally, and we need to drastically reduce or eliminate livestock agriculture. And I think that plant-based diets are the linchpin of this plan, of this proposal. I think that we need to make alliances with the environmental movement and with progressive movements elsewhere, everywhere. Because who's doing all the consuming that's polluting the planet and so forth? It's rich people, basically. I hate to say it. It's rich countries and rich people in every country. So I think that we need to somehow have some measure of social justice. That's what we need to do in order to get to a more sustainable world. So let's work together for a plant-based world. Thank you. Yeah.